People used to describe me as easy. Easy to work with. Easy to overlook. Easy to depend on without acknowledging. At the time, I thought it was a compliment. I had been at the company for 3 years when I realized something wasn't quite right. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing ever did. No matter how much work I took on, how many late evenings I stayed, how many problems I quietly solved before they became visible. Things just continued. Others were praised. Others were promoted. Others were introduced in meetings as key players. I was described as *supportive star. My name is Adora. And for a long time, I existed in that office like background noise. Necessary, familiar, rarely acknowledged. It wasn't a hostile environment. That would have been easier to understand. It was polite. Smiles in the hallway. Friendly check-ins. Casual compliments that never translated into opportunity. Adora's great at keeping things running, my manager once said during a team meeting. People nodded. No one asked how. No one asked why. I worked in operations, the kind of role that touches everything but owns nothing. If something went wrong, it landed on my desk. If something went right, it belonged to someone else. I didn't complain. I told myself this was how you earned trust. That visibility came later. That patience mattered. And maybe it does. But only when patience isn't mistaken for silence. The first time I noticed the imbalance clearly was during a project debrief. I had coordinated timelines, fixed last-minute errors, smoothed communication between teams. My manager praised the project lead instead. He smiled modestly and said, "Couldn't have done it without the team." That was it. No mention. No follow-up. I clapped with everyone else. I remember thinking, *maybe next time. That thought stayed with me far longer than it should have. Over time, I noticed patterns. Who spoke in meetings, and who was interrupted. Whose ideas were repeated, and whose were reframed by someone louder. Who was trusted instinctively, and who had to prove themselves repeatedly. I learned to speak carefully, briefly, only when necessary. It wasn't fear. It was efficiency. I watched people advance not because they were better, but because they were seen. And I wasn't. At least, not in the way that mattered. What no one realized, what I barely realized myself, was that I was learning the system while everyone else was busy performing inside it. I wasn't invisible. I was observing. Being overlooked does something strange to you. It doesn't make you angry at first. It makes you doubt your instincts. I started asking myself questions I'd never asked before. Was I actually good at my job? Or just reliable? Was I missing something obvious? Some invisible rule everyone else understood? So I paid closer attention. I noticed how certain people spoke with confidence even when they weren't fully prepared. How they filled space with words until it sounded like authority. I noticed how managers responded to tone more than substance. And I noticed how often my work quietly prevented problems no one ever knew existed. When deadlines were met smoothly, no one asked why. When systems worked without interruption, no one questioned how. But when something slipped, even slightly, my inbox filled up. I became the person people went to when they were stuck, not officially, but practically. Can you take a look at this real quick? You're good at figuring these things out. I know it's not really your role, but I said yes every time. Not because I wanted to be liked. Because I wanted to understand everything. I started mapping processes in my head, who depended on whom, where information stalled, how decisions actually got made. I saw how credit flowed upward while responsibility flowed downward. One afternoon, I overheard my manager praising a colleague for streamlining operations. It was my spreadsheet. My structure. My logic. My work. I sat at my desk afterward, staring at my screen, feeling something unfamiliar settle in. Not anger. Clarity. I stopped assuming recognition would arrive organically. It rarely does. From that point on, I changed one thing. Quietly. I began documenting. Not confrontationally. Not defensively. I followed up conversations with summary emails. I saved versions of work. I tracked decisions. Still helpful. Still cooperative. But no longer invisible. I also noticed how often people relied on me emotionally, venting about stress, about confusion, about leadership. I listened. People reveal a lot when they think you're safe. And I was safe. Too safe. During a quarterly review, my manager told me I was consistent. That was the word. Not ambitious. Not strategic. Consistent. I thanked him. Then I went back to my desk and made a decision I didn't share with anyone. If the system wouldn't see me clearly, I would learn how to reposition myself inside it. Not by demanding attention. By becoming unavoidable. I didn't announce the change. That would have defeated the purpose. I simply became more deliberate. I stopped jumping in immediately when something broke. I waited just long enough for the gap to be noticed, not to cause damage, but to make absence visible. Then I stepped in calmly and fixed it. People started saying things like, "I'm glad Adora's on this." Not with admiration. With relief. I adjusted how I communicated too. Shorter emails. Clearer summaries. Fewer explanations. When I spoke in meetings, I waited until the conversation circled itself into confusion. Then I clarified. Once. That's when I started being heard. Not because my ideas were new, but because timing gave them weight. A colleague pulled me aside one afternoon. "You should speak up more," she said. "You're really smart." I smiled. "I know." She laughed, surprised. So was I. Leadership began including me in conversations they used to handle without me. Not officially, but informally. Quick check-ins. "What do you think?" Moments. Still no credit. But dependency was forming. I noticed tension from certain colleagues, subtle shifts in tone, longer pauses before responding. The people who had benefited most from my silence were the first to feel threatened by my presence. One of them interrupted me in a meeting, reframing my suggestion as his own. This time, I didn't let it slide. "I was just about to say that," I added calmly. "That's the approach I outlined earlier." The room went quiet for half a second. He nodded, a little too quickly. It wasn't confrontation. It was correction. After that, things changed. My manager began asking me for updates directly instead of through others. People CC'd me more often. Decisions slowed when I wasn't in the room. I still wasn't promoted. But I was central. That's a dangerous position, for everyone except the person who understands it. I knew something else too. Centrality attracts scrutiny. So I prepared. I refined my skills. Learned things no one else bothered with. Made myself fluent in areas others avoided because they were tedious or complex. I wasn't chasing recognition. I was building leverage. And leverage, once established, doesn't need to announce itself. It waits. The shift didn't go unnoticed. It never does. Once people realize you're no longer quietly absorbing everything, they test how far they can still push you. It started small. A meeting scheduled without me. One that directly affected my work. A decision made hastily, then handed to me to execute. An assumption that I would stay late to fix problems I hadn't created. I handled it the way I always had. Calmly. But differently. When a colleague sent me a rushed request at the end of the day, I replied the next morning, professionally, politely, asking for clarification and proper approval. Nothing confrontational. Just structure. The reaction was immediate. "Oh, I thought you could just handle it," he said, half smiling. "I can," I replied. "Once it's assigned correctly." That half smile didn't return. My manager began testing me too, asking if I could be flexible in ways that only ever applied to me, hinting that I might not be leadership material if I couldn't adapt. I listened. Then I asked questions. What would leadership look like in this situation? What authority would come with that responsibility? How would success be measured? He wasn't used to that. The conversation ended without answers. Behind the scenes, the undermining became more pointed. Credit for my work was casually redirected. My contributions summarized vaguely, while others were highlighted specifically. I felt the familiar pressure to retreat, to become smaller again. There was a moment, late one evening, alone at my desk, when I considered it. It would have been easier. But easier isn't always safer. Instead, I made another quiet adjustment. I stopped absorbing chaos. I began setting boundaries through process. Clear timelines. Defined responsibilities. Documented approvals. Not emotional boundaries. Operational ones. And systems don't argue. They expose. The more structure I introduced, the more obvious it became where things were failing, and who was responsible. Leadership noticed. Not because I told them. Because results changed. A project nearly derailed when I refused to bypass protocol. It forced a conversation no one wanted to have. For the first time, I was in the room when accountability was discussed. Not as support. As context. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. By then, the contrast was clear. The turning point didn't come with an announcement. It came with a problem no one could ignore. A major initiative, high visibility, tight deadline, began unraveling midway through execution. Misaligned expectations. Missed handoffs. Confusion layered on top of urgency. The usual voices grew louder. Meetings multiplied. Explanations piled up. Nothing improved. Then someone said my name. Not dramatically. Almost reluctantly. Can Adora take a look at this? I was already familiar with the issue. I'd seen the gaps weeks earlier. I hadn't said anything because it hadn't been my place, and no one had asked. Now they were asking. I reviewed everything quietly, asked a few precise questions, reframed the scope, identified where responsibility had blurred into assumption. Then I laid out a plan. Clear, measured, feasible. The room went still. Not impressed. Relieved. For the first time, leadership didn't move on immediately. They asked follow-up questions. They listened. And when the plan worked, because it did, something shifted permanently. I was no longer helpful. I was essential. My manager started bringing me into meetings earlier, before decisions were finalized. People paused when I wasn't present. Emails waited for my input. Colleagues who had once redirected credit now looped me in carefully, almost deferentially. The same ones who used to speak over me now asked, "Does this make sense to you?" I didn't change my tone. I didn't gloat. I stayed steady. Recognition followed naturally. Not applause. Trust. That's the kind that lasts. During my next review, my manager struggled to summarize my role. "You've grown beyond your position," he admitted. I nodded. "So what does that mean?" I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. The system was catching up to me, slowly, awkwardly. I left that meeting without promises. But I didn't need them anymore. Because the truth was obvious now, not just to me, but to everyone watching. The office no longer functioned smoothly without my involvement. And once that realization settles in, it doesn't disappear. Once the shift became undeniable, people responded in different ways. Some adapted. Others resisted. The resistance was subtle: delays in response, meetings rescheduled without notice, decisions made hastily before I could weigh in. It wasn't overt sabotage. It was fear trying to stay relevant. Leadership, meanwhile, began formalizing what had already become reality. I was asked to lead initiatives that crossed departments. Not temporarily. Not just this once. Consistently. No title change at first. Just responsibility. And I accepted it, not eagerly, not reluctantly, but deliberately, because I understood something important by then. Titles catch up to influence, not the other way around. Colleagues who once ignored me now watched closely. Some tried to align themselves. Others tested boundaries. I responded the same way every time, with clarity. This decision needs sign-off. That falls under this scope. Let's align on expectations. No emotion. No apology. And no room for dismissal. My manager began introducing me differently in meetings. This is Adora, she oversees coordination on this. Overseas. That word mattered. The tension reached a peak when a senior colleague attempted to override one of my decisions publicly, confidently, incorrectly. I corrected him calmly, cited the data, outlined the rationale. The room stayed silent. Leadership backed me without hesitation. That was the moment everyone understood. Authority had shifted. Not through conflict. Through competence. After the meeting, my manager pulled me aside. "We need to talk about your role," he said. I nodded. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. The conversation wasn't dramatic. No flattery. No grand promises. Just alignment. Expanded scope. Formal recognition. Compensation adjusted accordingly. Not a reward. An acknowledgement. I walked back to my desk feeling something unfamiliar. Not pride. Stability. I hadn't fought my way up. I hadn't demanded space. I had grown until the space made itself. And the office, the same one that once undermined me, now relied on me to hold it together. The office didn't feel different after everything settled. That surprised me. I expected a sense of arrival, some moment where it all clicked into place. Instead, things simply worked better. Decisions moved faster. Projects landed cleaner. People came prepared. The noise faded, replaced by focus. And I realized something important. I hadn't changed the office. I had changed my place within it. The same desks. The same hallways. The same meetings. But now, when I spoke, people listened without waiting to see who else would agree. My role was clear. Not loudly defined, but understood. The colleagues who once dismissed me adjusted their behavior. Some became respectful. Some became distant. That was fine. Not everyone grows at the same pace. Leadership treated me differently too, not as support, but as strategy. My input wasn't requested as a favor. It was expected. There was a moment during a meeting, an ordinary one, when a complex issue surfaced unexpectedly. Conversation stalled. Eyes moved around the table. Then someone said, "Adora, what do you think?" I answered. The decision followed. No debate. No hesitation. That was when I knew the journey was complete. Not because of the authority itself, but because I no longer needed validation from it. The office that once undermined me had done something else instead. It had taught me patience, precision, self-trust. I didn't rise by pushing others down. I rose by refusing to stay unseen, by understanding systems instead of fighting them, by growing until I no longer fit inside the limits placed on me. People still call me quiet. They're not wrong. But quiet doesn't mean small. It means measured. And measured strength lasts.